Keys to the Shop, episode 93, a conversation with the 2018 U.S. Brewers Cup Champion, Becca Woodard. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show, and I really want to thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to bring you this conversation with Becca Woodard. She's the new U.S. Brewers Cup champion, first-time competitor, and right out of the gate, she's dominating. So it was really awesome to get to sit down and talk coffee and talk about what drives her in the industry. We really get deep here, and I think there's a lot of beneficial things in this conversation. Before we get started here, I want to give a shout out to our great sponsors here at Keys to the Shop, starting with Prima Coffee. So Prima Coffee is a specialty coffee equipment supplier. They're based out of Louisville, Kentucky, and from the beginning of the company, they've set out to make the best coffee brewing equipment available to both the general public and also professionals. Their focus is on curating the best equipment for every need. That goes from grinders to espresso machines to under-counter refrigeration. Pretty much anything you can think of that you would need for your home bar or for your coffee bar. So if you need to upgrade your equipment in your business or you're opening a coffee shop and want to outfit it with the best, go to prima-coffee.com and see what they have to offer. Reach out to them via phone or email. Let them know that Keys to the Shop sent you. You know, they put a big emphasis on having the expertise to help their customers get the right gear to fit every situation. So you know you're going to be in good hands. So again, that's prima-coffee.com and see what they can do for you. And my thanks to Prima for their support of Keys to the Shop. Now, also, I want to thank our sponsor, Pacific Foods. They are the ones behind the Barista Series line of non-dairy performance beverages, which are designed specifically for the professional barista and the standards for excellence that they demand. So that goes from almond milk to soy, coconut, rice, or oat milk. Their ability to take the heat from steaming, produce an unmatched silky texture, and keep the flavor balance focused on coffee makes it a perfect choice for your cafe's menu. And Pacific has just been a great supporter of the specialty coffee industry for a very long time. And they've demonstrated this by, listening to the community and listening to their needs and serving those needs well. So go to pacificfoods.com and see how the Barista Series line of non-dairy performance beverages can help elevate the non-dairy options in your cafe. And again, my thanks to Pacific Foods for your support of Keys to the Shop. If you haven't already subscribed to Keys to the Shop, would you consider subscribing to the show and also leaving a rating or review on iTunes? That would really mean a lot to me because it really helps the show's visibility. And it's always encouraging to see how the show has positively impacted you. And of course, if you have feedback or comments or suggestions and things like that, I'm available through email, chris@keystotheshop.com. And also, if you want the show notes to the Keys to the Shop episodes, just go to keystotheshop.com. On the sidebar, there is a place for you to put your email. And when you do put your email there, you're going to be signed up to receive a newsletter on a weekly basis that will have the show notes for the most recent episodes, as well as the links to resources and helpful things mentioned in the conversation, and also news about Keys to the Shop. So once you do that, you'll be set up and it'll be cool. So I'd encourage you to do that as well. So today we are talking with a champion, 2018 Brewers Cup champion, Becca Woodard. Becca is a wholesale account manager and head trainer at George Howell Coffee in Boston, Massachusetts. Becca is a first-time competitor, so this is her first time competing, and she has taken home the gold, which is an incredible feat. Big props to Becca for just coming out and dominating in this competition. It was a great presentation to watch. Of course, on the iTunes description here, we're linking to her performances video. So I encourage you to watch that, maybe even before you listen to this conversation if you haven't already. Now, Becca has an incredible amount of passion and humility where her approach to coffee and her community are one in the same. And that was a big emphasis in her competition routine. It's a big emphasis in her life. And so we get to hear a lot about what drives her in those spaces. We break down her routine and the kind of coffee she used. We talk about freezing coffee, talk about flavor calls and profiles, generally kind of in this conversation, we riff on the industry and how we can help better serve our communities and our customers and coffee at large. So let's get into it. I'm excited and honored to present to you a conversation with 2018 U.S. Brewers Cup Champion, Becca Woodard. Becca, welcome to Keys to the Shop. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
I'm so excited to be here.
We have been in communication about getting you on the show, and you've just been a whirlwind of activity all over the country. I think you just got back from CoffeeCon in New York, right?
That's true. Yeah. I just went there. I took the bus down on 4 a.m. Saturday morning, rather, and then back up Sunday night. Got home at like midnight.
And then there's work. Well, let me just say congratulations. Well done.
Thank you so much.
I really enjoyed your presentation. We're going to be talking about that here in the episode. I wonder, I mean, this is early in your competition career, I think, right?
It's very early. This is my first year.
This is your first one, yeah.
Yeah.
And here you are, the U.S. Brewers Cup champion.
Yeah, it's crazy. I definitely was absolutely not expecting this to happen.
So your background in coffee, I'm curious, as a newcomer to the competitions, I think a lot of people will want to know, like, how did you start in coffee and what led you to really pursue competition as a route of like expressing yourself and through coffee?
I started in coffee just because I was working in food service and got a management position at a cafe. Wasn't really into coffee, just was there because it was a job. And at the time, the wholesale account trainer for George Howell was the one who trained me, and because that shop used George Howell coffee, and it was really exciting the way that he presented it to me. And he started talking about brew ratios and extraction and total dissolved solids, and I was like, this is so cool, I need to learn more. And it kind of just exploded from there, which is kind of cool because I now work for George Howell. I'm now the wholesale account trainer for them, and it's a great company. I love working for them. Sweet.
So that you're now in that position and you get to like inspire somebody else to get into coffee via total dissolved solids.
Yeah, exactly. That's my favorite part when I'm training somebody and they're like, wait, what? How much goes into coffee? I'm like, yes, you get it.
That's right. Isn't it magical? So what about coffee makes you want to stick around the industry? And really, this is something I view like in competition, like you've taken this step to compete. It seems like you'd like to stay in coffee for a little bit. Like, what is it about the industry that draws you to want to invest more and more into it? And then how did competition really come about?
Yeah, definitely. I found out that through coffee, really, that I love to learn in a kind of non-traditional way, in the way we think about learning at school, right? I never was really much of an academic, but the hands-on and the figuring it out part, and the fact that there's so much still to learn that nobody knows about coffee is really cool and interesting to me. And I learn something new every single day, which is so fascinating to me, and it keeps me challenged. And that's part of why I wanted to start doing the competitions, is to add another element to that challenge. But actually, now that I've started doing it, I think what's really going to keep me in it is the community. Everybody that I've met in just this past year since starting to compete is just incredible people, and it's an incredible community to be a part of and to work alongside some of the best in the industry. It's really cool.
It is kind of an isolated job that we have in our particular companies. We go in and we get to know our bars really, really well, sometimes too well. And even if you're doing a job like yours, as a wholesale account trainer, you're going back to the same accounts a lot of times, and you see yourself a lot in a car or a train or something. That community sounds like it just gives some great relief and some perspective. Definitely. When you competed and you're partaking in community and everything else, the whole presentation was focused in part around community, and that's part of your passion. What is that about the competition routine that you included? Your community, you included working in your own community as part of your competition routine's main emphasis. How did you tie that in, and how did that theme kind of come about for you?
So the theme was really kind of what I started with. Once I made it into the national competition, I knew immediately after being involved in the qualifiers, and I also went to I went to both qualifying events this year, because I did compete in cup tasters in the Reno qualifier. I didn't do fantastic, but I did learn a lot about the Brewers Cup there. So, I went to 2 qualifying events and saw the people there. And, something that it's kind of become my favorite anecdote about my experiences this year, but I brought my mom with me to my Brewers Cup qualifier in New Orleans. She's my best friend, and, I just wanted that support with me. And she's not really into the coffee competitions. She didn't really know anything about it beforehand. And it was on the second day of competition. We were sitting in the audience watching other competitors, and she turns to me and she goes, there's only like 2 other women here. I was like, you just hit the nail on the head, Mom. And that was kind of a moment for me of like, I knew that there was a large lack of diversity and representation in the competitions, but even, to have somebody who didn't already know that coming in, like, it was so obvious that she said something about it. I knew going into the nationals that I really wanted to use the stage as a way to talk about these issues. Mm-hmm. Originally, before we had picked which coffee we were going to compete with, I had started kind of getting some ideas together for a script, and it was definitely very much focused on community and, my local community, the specialty coffee community, globally. And then we ended up picking this coffee, which was a Panamanian geisha from the 90 plus geisha estates. And if you go onto their website and you just immediately when I started researching 90 plus, I had heard of them and I had their coffee before, and I had actually seen Joseph at a talk that we hosted in Boston a little while ago. But when I started to really look at the values of the company, one of their main thing is they talk about the responsibility they have to the earth, humanity, and taste. And those 3 things really resonated with me. So I ended up taking that and kind of reworking my script into less community focused and more focused on those values. Yeah, I have been working with a group here in Boston called Boston Intersectional Coffee Collective. They've hosted a couple events in Boston so far. We actually did one last night, which was a sit down with me.
Oh, nice.
Just to talk about competition, and not a lot of people from Boston compete, so it's not something that's really talked about or known about here. And we just wanted to talk to baristas about it and, let them know that we're here for support, and if they have questions or if they're interested in competing, to kind of help kickstart that conversation. But yeah, we're looking forward to doing more events in the future too. So keep an eye out for those if you're in the Boston area.
Nice. So your theme, kind of talking about Earth, humanity, and taste, it was. I really was impressed how it was woven in nicely as a comparison between how the farmer was changing things on their farm and how we all have the power to change things on an individual level by engaging in our local communities and doing things, not only in our coffee bars, but our neighborhoods and things like that. What inspired you in that performance to really say, like, man, what about the coffee that made you think this is exactly what they're doing with this coffee is what we need to be doing in our local areas?
Yeah. So, the way that the 90 plus estates are run is really cool. I didn't get to talk about it quite as much as I would have liked to during my performance because we do only have 10 minutes on stage. But so when talking about the earth side of it, they are reforesting the entire estate. When they purchased it, it was pretty much just a cattle farm. So a lot of the vegetation was dead or dying, and the soil was really compact, and it wasn't healthy. So they've been able to recover about a third of the farm. That's now pretty much just a natural rainforest. And the idea is that they're just gonna make this whole estate a natural rainforest where coffee is found to grow and can thrive and be healthy and live longer and produce healthier, more nutrient-rich fruit, which will produce better tasting coffee. So that part is really cool. And then on the humanity side, they are doing some really incredible things with the way that they pay their employees, and not just how they pay their employees, but how they treat their employees. In Panama, I'm not sure about most coffee farms or other coffee farms, but I do know that when Joseph Brodsky, who's the owner of 90 Plus, when he purchased the estates, the people who are already running them and already growing coffee there, the employees, had a certain way of running things where essentially there were indigenous people who were helping out with the harvest, kind of like the not full year work. They would just come in for the harvest season. And something that was just standard, it was how it was done, was that management didn't really talk to the indigenous people. They didn't say hello. They didn't interact with them at all. It was this very hard line.
Weird.
Very weird. Yeah. And that's how Joseph felt too. And he was like, I don't understand why. And so he slowly but surely changed that. And now a lot of those indigenous people, their families actually live on the farm. He's kind of like a household name in that area of Panama because people know that they can go work for him and get treated fairly. They can get paid well, and that they will be working for a really great company. And then, of course, on the taste side of it, definitely was not a bad tasting coffee.
Why? Yeah, no doubt. What were the flavor descriptors you were using in your competition?
Well, there were quite a few. So the aroma of this coffee was insane. There were a ton of florals in it, including jasmine and freesia and honeysuckle. There was also some orange peel and really ripe red berry, like raspberries and strawberries. And that was just the aroma.
Wow.
The initial flavors when you first started tasting it while it was still hot were more on the dark chocolate and orange peel side of things. And as it cooled, it gained so much complexity. A lot of those floral notes you could taste them as well as smell them. The orange peel tended to kind of deepen and taste more like orange liqueur, like a triple sec or a Cointreau. And there was this really creamy passion fruit curd thing going on. And I think I finished off with a white sangria.
That is a lot.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a fraction of what I actually said on stage. I can't even remember all of them, to be completely honest.
And these are things that you said were communicated to the judges. And so that's nerve-wracking with so many different flavor descriptors. You've got to be pretty accurate, because if you miss a descriptor, if you miss a flavor call and they don't taste the jasmine, that's a point off. Was it pretty nerve-wracking with so many different descriptions?
Oh, definitely. And I wasn't sure at first if it was going to be too much. I knew that all those flavors were there. This coffee was so unbelievably complex. They were obviously there. They were very, very distinct, and none of those flavors were a stretch at all. But I wasn't sure if the judges were going to just feel overwhelmed with the pure number of flavor descriptors I gave. But I found out from I asked a friend who's been in the competitions before, pretty much right before I went on stage, and he said, if they're all accurate, the more you have, the more points you're going to get. So, but I will say memorizing those notes was really hard. I, especially on Sunday for the final round, we tasted the coffee in the morning, and me and my two coaches sat down and tasted the coffee. I think we tasted through 3 or 4 different cups, and just spent a good 45 minutes to an hour figuring out exactly what we wanted to say on stage. And then I think I only had it was like less than an hour to memorize them before actually performing, and I was absolutely freaking out.
Oh my gosh, I would be too, yeah. But
I ended up memorizing them.
There you go.
Saying them all correctly.
And you didn't do too bad in the competition, did you?
No, not too bad.
It's interesting to think about the flavor calls and the emphasis on them. And sometimes I think in competition you can really think, well, it's accurate enough. But really, when you think about it, it's one of these entry points for customers to get into coffee is if you're nailing flavor descriptors on bags, or across the counter when they're asking about, what does this batch brew option taste like versus the other one or whatever it is. It does seem like it's a way that we get people in the door for specialty to be accurate with those flavor calls. Do you find that to be true?
It can be. I do find that there has to already be a certain level of knowledge for them to understand even what flavor notes mean. Something that I've noticed being at the George Howell Cafe, where, most cafes I've worked before working for George Howell didn't roast their own coffee and were more of a, coffee and food, and they served a very approachable house blend type coffee, one espresso that was not a single origin or, it was blended to go with milk. And then working at George Howell and being able to work for a cafe that wants to showcase all of these really cool single origin coffees that are, much less standard. Sometimes the tasting notes freak people out and get them thinking that it's flavored coffee, or they think that their coffee is going to taste like a fruit punch, and we know that's not true. But I have noticed that it can get people a little less likely to want to try the coffee.
So the types of flavor descriptors might be maybe a thing.
Yeah, like if I told somebody what my coffee that I competed with tasted like, who just came in off the street and wasn't a big coffee drinker, they would probably walk away, you know?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Like, they don't want their coffee to taste like that. They want their coffee to taste like coffee.
Oh, yeah. What a novel concept. Well, ice cream's flavored like coffee sometimes. Like,
yeah,
coffee is a flavor.
No, it is. And that's part of it, too, is like trying to convey to people that the flavor notes are only a small fraction of what the coffee tastes like. 90% of it tastes like coffee. Sure.
We're just like pulling out the small little fraction of signal above the noise of the fact that this is a brown, hot, bitter drink.
Yeah.
Bitter-ish. That's in this competition. One of the things that struck a lot of people, and you really just didn't make a big deal about it at all, just casually going about your business, brewing 3 coffees at once, and you're hooking up all of these kettles, and I'm just sitting there going, man, I want her to talk about this. I mean, not that what you were talking about was bad, but let's talk about it. Like, how did that get conceptualized? And it looks really fun to use.
Yeah, definitely. So it was funny. Originally I was going to talk about it.
Oh.
I thought that going up there and not talking about it would take points away, because it would be like kind of distracting and like, what did you just do? Why didn't you tell us what you just did? You know? And I actually, it was something that I had kind of added onto my script towards the end of my preparations, and I forgot to say it on Friday, on the first day. I just left that sentence out by accident. Or it might have been a little bit more of a nervous thing, but I left it out and got some feedback from, my coaches and my friends who watched the performance, and nobody said, I asked, should I, do you think it's going to reflect negatively that I didn't say anything? And everybody said, no, it didn't seem weird that you didn't say anything. So I ended up leaving it out on Sunday on purpose. The way that came about was because of how unique this coffee was, and especially the aroma of it. I couldn't use any other brew method other than the Valkyrie, which I ended up using on stage. It was just, nothing else really showcased how complex that coffee was, and especially the aroma was really hard to capture in any other brewer. So I knew I really, really, really wanted to use that brewer, and I was going to do everything in my power to be able to use it, because the problem was, if I brewed them one at a time, I couldn't get it done in 10 minutes. It was one solid pour that was really, really slow for the entire brew, and it just took me too long to brew 3 of them in a row. So I started playing around. Yeah, I started playing around with pouring 2 kettles at once, but I don't go to the gym. I don't work out. I am really out of shape, and one arm was a little bit stronger than the other, and I just couldn't get them to pour at the same rate. And even if I did, then I had 2 cups that were one temperature and another cup that was a totally different temperature.
Right.
And while the judges, of course, the head judge checks for consistency between the cups, and of course they understand that the flavors will change as the temperature drops, but this coffee really changed as the temperature dropped. So I really didn't want to serve them at 3 different temperatures or 2 different temperatures. So then I started playing around with, well, what if I can hold 3 kettles in my hand by the handles and support them underneath with my other hand with a towel, but they were just too wobbly.
That sounds super dangerous.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly the most stable thing. So then I was talking to my coworkers, and somebody was like, well, what if we build a box? And then somebody else was like, well, what if we hang that box on something? And then we kind of went through a couple of different like iterations and finally landed on this just very shallow box to hold the kettles all straight while they hung from their handles on a metal bar.
Nice.
So I could just tilt them all at the same time and then tilt them all back at the same time. We did run into like one more little tiny thing, was that they didn't all pour at the same rate. I think one, because the box was thrown together pretty quickly, so it wasn't the most perfect thing in the world. And also those kettles are, they're not laser 3D printed to be perfect or anything. So,
yeah.
So I did have to actually weigh out the water that I put in each of them to make sure that they would pour at the same rate. I had to put more water in one than another so that they would end up pouring at the same rate.
Wow, it's fascinating. Like, just so much teamwork and exploration on your part and practicality that goes into something that just ends up stunning people on display there. It just seems like the same thing as the coffee itself, like all the intention and hard work to cultivate something that is put into a cup in something so simple is just so impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, there was definitely a lot of, every single movement I made on stage was with a lot of intention, especially since that, I'm holding this thing with hot water above the judges' heads. And the way that the box was built, because like I said, it was put together in an afternoon. It was, kind of MacGyvered a little bit, I could say, but I had to insert these little stabilizing pieces that couldn't fit in and then be hooked on to that bar because they were too big. So I had to hook onto the bar and then shove these really, really tight pieces of wood in to make sure that nothing fell. And yeah, it was mildly terrifying.
You don't burn your knuckles on the way down.
Yeah. Seriously, it was a lot of practicing just the motions over and over again.
Sweet. So the coffee itself was frozen, like all George Howell coffee. I'm wondering how that works out, because so many people use, not I say so many people, there's been frozen coffee before, but this is different because it's just every coffee. For your presentation, like, how does that work? Do you thaw it beforehand? Do you take it right out of frozen into the grinder like some do? What's behind that, practically speaking, on stage?
Well, so actually the roasted coffee was not frozen.
Mm-hmm.
It was only frozen while it was green.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. So we do freeze all of our green coffee. It practically stops aging in its tracks. Really, actually, it's just slowing it down. But, we can store coffee for like 20 plus years and not have it age if it's frozen.
Awesome.
So we do, when we remove the coffee from the freezer, we do thaw it before we roast it. But then with this coffee in particular, I am a huge advocate for freezing your roasted beans. There's a lot of, if you haven't heard of it before, look up all the research that's been done about grinding frozen coffee.
Right.
It's pretty fascinating, but grinding your coffee while it's frozen can actually improve your grind. And also keeping coffee frozen, as long as it's sealed, you can store it for years and years and years and it stays the same.
I keep meaning to experiment with that, but I just am too impatient.
Yeah, no, definitely do. I mean, it's great because if you get a coffee that you really, really love, but you're not going to go through a whole bag in, a week, vacuum seal a little bit of it and put it in your freezer, and then, take it out next year when that coffee roaster has the fresh crop of that same coffee and compare them, and it's fun. But I did compete with a frozen roasted coffee in my qualifier, which we had roasted a month beforehand and froze to kind of show how freezing can help preserve coffee.
Wow.
But it also was 3 years old as green coffee. So that was a fun thing to bring to the competition stage. And like, we wanted to originally use a frozen coffee for the national competition, but the coffee we ended up going with was just so awesome that we couldn't not use it. Which it was frozen. I shouldn't say it wasn't frozen. It wasn't a vintage.
Right. That's such a fascinating thing to get a vintage coffee on a bar. It just seems, it's so rare. It's not many people are doing that. It probably just, you can count on one hand maybe. I'm not aware of anybody else outside of a few people doing the deep freeze of green coffee. Is this coffee the one that you're going to use in Worlds? And are you bringing the box?
The coffee that I brought to Nationals is all gone.
Oh no.
And the box broke on the way home.
No. You needed to sell those. You need a website.
Yeah, right. No, I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to use at the World yet for coffee. I'm honestly not sure if I'm going to the World yet, but that's another conversation.
Right. Right.
But even though the box broke, you'll definitely see something along the same lines from me.
Nice. Still using the Valkyrie.
We'll see. I actually
it's all up in the air.
It's all up in the air, yeah. I haven't used the Valkyrie on any other coffee. I literally tried it for the first time with this coffee. So, I mean, I really, really love it with the 90 plus for sure, and I can't imagine it being bad with any coffee, but...
Cool. Well, I look forward to seeing what happens. Back to your kind of the theme of your presentation a little bit, one of the things that you talked about, which is an obvious farming metaphor as much as it is true for life in general, is how it takes time to change things. 4-year cycle of a coffee plant from seedling to giving us coffee and whatever else you happen to want to change, be it yourself or, systems, etc. That was a huge emphasis here. What are the dangers of not embracing the idea that it takes time to change things?
So the reason I really emphasize the amount of time that it does take to change things is so for anybody who doesn't know, something that happened during this year's competition cycle was that the SCA announced they were holding a couple of the competitions in Dubai. And among many things, Dubai is potentially an unsafe place for queer folks. There are literally laws against being gay in Dubai. So it seemed like kind of an oversight, and a lot of people are upset about it. Through the conversations that I saw when people were really upset, there are still people still upset, but when it first happened and there were a lot of conversations happening about it, almost every conversation I saw on all of the, coffee forums and stuff that I'm involved in, were talking about it. There were a lot of people who were saying, let's boycott the SCA entirely. Let's start something new. Let's start something different. Let's start doing different competitions. And I think that's great. I think that's awesome. And that the more variation we can have, the better. I do also think, though, that as an industry, we're still pretty young. Specialty coffee and the Specialty Coffee Association is young. And as of right now, it's, kind of the most well-known coffee organization for specialty. And they're listening to us. There are things happening that are changing. Mm-hmm. And there are many people who are working towards those changes. And I'm trying to do what I can to work towards those changes. And I think that if we just slow down a little bit and try to work towards improving. I think that in addition to also having other organizations and other competitions, this is the way that I've decided to approach it.
Well said. Yeah.
Thank you.
That community that you love that really keeps you in coffee and this industry. So many people with so much power to change things, especially consistently over time. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And just to add to that, today, the SCA announced that they are not going to hold any competitions in Dubai in 2018. So things are changing. They're listening. They are.
Yeah, that was a big announcement.
Yeah.
So, going forward as the champion, what is it that you want to inspire people to do, both in their communities and in their careers as baristas or people working in coffee during your reign as the Brewers Cup Champion? What is it that you hope to affect change for in those areas?
For marginalized people in coffee right now, things are not always super great. I touched on this earlier with the representation in competitions. It's a lot of times not only are cis white men winning these competitions, but most companies are sending cis white men to these competitions. And I think part of the reason for that, a big reason for that, is that those are the people who are getting promotions, and those are the people who are getting the jobs past barista. There's plenty of marginalized people who deserve those positions and should be going to competition. And hopefully some owner of a company that wants to send somebody to competition is listening and is hearing these words and thinks, you know what, I should send, my barista that's not a cis white man to competition because they're awesome and they're great and that's who I want to represent my company, and like I said, I really wasn't expecting to win this thing. I am almost like scared to talk about what I would like to I have all this influence now and it's a little freaky.
Right.
But I just, being a queer woman, I understand how, especially at the cafe level, you get treated differently and it can be hard and it can be frustrating. And if you're somebody who's in a similar position and needs any advice or anything, reach out to me. Let me know. I'll do what I can.
I like the idea of how, in competition, we tend to, in our communities, we gather together people in our communities. We tend to, surround ourselves with people who are easy to get along with, and they tend to look like us and act like us and believe like us, and et cetera. And then it can turn into this landscape that looks like a bunch of mirrors.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate that. Like, look at your landscape there and say, am I falling prey to that? Is this what's happening? Am I feeding into that? It's worth looking at in the hiring process and the sending process, because it's a very real thing. And whether you're a terrible person or not, and most people are doing it just not even aware. So I think your words definitely would help inspire people to take at least a look at this. Slow down long enough to take a look at things.
Definitely. I think anybody who's hiring for a cafe, absolutely take a second, look at your staff. What do they look like? Be aware of that. It's important.
Yeah.
And also, not only what does your staff look like, but what does the community that your staff is serving look like? You know?
Yeah, that's
Something to
an
think about.
awkward that's an awkward conversation to have with yourself when you look out and you realize the community you're serving is not reflected in the staff that's serving them.
Yeah, it's too regular a thing in coffee.
Yeah. So moving forward, I just want to say that, I think it's cool that you're kind of freaked out by your influence. Far better than simply being cavalier with influence. So that's a good position to be in. So if I could offer any encouragement to be like, hey, that's great. It helps you choose your words and pick your battles and things like that. So awesome. I really have enjoyed talking with you about these things and getting to know you more, your story, and how you want to just influence the industry. So you mentioned that people could reach out to you. So the question is, how do we stay in touch with you, find out what you're up to, and get in contact with you?
Yeah, so my Instagram is Becca Can't Read. It's all one word, no spaces, no apostrophe, nothing. And that's where I'm most active. I'm not very good at social media, but I promise I will try to get back to you in a timely manner if you message me.
Right.
And then on Twitter, it's Becca Can Read, all one word.
Oh, I see. Interesting. So we should type things for you to read anyway, no matter which one we're using.
Yes.
That's good. Cool. So thank you for joining us on the show and talking about coffee, talking about life. We'll look forward to seeing what you come up with for Worlds and, what's next for you in your career. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I love this conversation with Becca, hearing the behind the scenes of how this competition routine came into being, the details about the coffees, the flavors, the putting together that pour station, all is really fascinating. And I walk away encouraged also by our conversation regarding change, the idea that change over time as we work within a system and within our communities and the spheres of influences that we have. Each one of us has different people whose lives we can speak into and affect. And so I walk away encouraged to take a step back and look at who is it that I'm impacting and how can I positively, make an impact and move the needle on things that concern my neighborhood, my family, my coworkers, my business, and things like that. I also love talking about how your cafe should be a reflection of your community and really putting the microscope on your hiring practices. Of course, hiring is such a huge, huge thing in the coffee industry, setting yourself up for success. There are so many qualified people to hold positions in cafes that don't simply look like or act like or believe like you do. And unfortunately, we do see in cafes there's a tendency for us to simply try and clone ourselves as if you're the hiring manager or if you're the owner. You want to hire people that you're comfortable with, but also oftentimes that's to the detriment of your coffee shop, because if your cafe is not a reflection of your community, it's going to be harder to serve that community, and because that neighborhood might not feel as comfortable coming into that shop. Maybe they don't think that it's for them. So I really do appreciate Becca's perspectives on these things, as well as encouraging us to take a look at what we can do to affect change over time. Be inspired by the way coffee farmers do it. Be inspired by the way you see other cafes doing it now. And be inspired by Becca, the way she has put herself out there and is discussing things that are important to her. You have the ability yourself to also make change over time, and I think you can take inspiration from this conversation. So my thanks to Becca for joining us on the show. Really enjoyed the conversation, Becca. I appreciate you, and I wish you all the best. Congratulations again. Now, if you want the show notes for this episode, again, go to keystotheshop.com, enter your email address in the sidebar, when you get to the website, and you'll be signed up to receive those emails that contain the show notes and news about Keys to the Shop. And speaking of news, Coffee Fest Denver is coming up shortly. Actually, at the airing of this episode, it's going to be in a few days. So if you're listening to this and you're in the Denver area and you can just make it to Coffee Fest, I highly encourage you to do so. It's real accessible. If you're in retail specialty, it is the best trade show for you to attend. A lot of free seminars and classes, as well as some really accessibly priced ones that will help you just make your business thrive and grow and become healthier. I really encourage you to check out coffeefest.com and find out more information. Just click on the Denver show and find out what's happening June 8th through the 10th in Denver, Colorado. I will be there teaching a few lectures, classes, as well as judging latte art. So if you're in the area, try to find me there and introduce yourself to me. It'd be awesome to shake your hand and say hello. So that's it today for this episode. Thank you so much for joining me here. I'll see you next week. And as always, I hope that this episode has given you keys to the shop.